We'll find out. Call to order the February 17th meeting of the Kingston Springs Board of Commissioners. Could everyone please rise and face the flag? Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, John, could you please call the roll?
Aaron Marsh is absent. Tony Gross.
Here.
Mike Harkis. Here. Lynn Remy.
Here.
Also here.
All right, we have a quorum. Do we have a motion to approve the January 2022 public hearing meeting minutes?
Motion to approve.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passes. We have a motion to approve the January 2022 City Commission meeting minutes.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. And then item 7, or sorry, do we have a motion to approve the agenda for tonight? I don't believe we have any additions either, so.
I'll make the motion to approve agenda. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion passes. On to announcements from commissioners.
The city workers have been, living in Florida, the salt life at home for the last few weeks. So I commend them for being right on top of it. And I feel those potholes quickly too. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bob?
I'm good.
Mike? All right. And then we have a little bit of a special announcement, and former Commissioner Etherly, could you come forward? Josh left us, when was it? November? November.
I wasn't planning on leaving that night.
He wasn't planning on leaving that night, but he moved on to greener pastures. At least he thinks slightly across the line here, so he's no longer on the city commission. And so we'd like to have you back here, obviously tonight, so that we can present you with this award for your time serving on the commission.
I'm telling you.
You guys probably come up and get a picture with Josh real quick. So sure. Williamson County, 2024. Yeah.
She's not gonna come up. She's welcome to, but I don't.
I have a daughter of a similar age, and I know she would definitely not come up here.
That's why I whispered.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Do not rent my house. It's a good deal.
I was trying to break up that old mill cruise.
It's the best deal in town. All right. On to community input and concerns. It looks like the only community input we have tonight is Mr. David Reisner, and he will be speaking about the Ellerslie development. So if you'd like to come on up and address the commission now.
Sure, Mr. Mayor. We're on the agenda under new business. I didn't know if you wanted me to wait and reserve my comments for that part of the agenda, or I can address them now in public comments.
I believe because we didn't, because this was kind of spur of the moment. Go ahead now would be the time.
Okay, great. As most of you know, my name is David Reisner. I'm an attorney in Kingston Springs, and I represent Energy Fit Solutions, Inc., Ron and LaDonna Merkel in regards to, as the developer, in regards to the Ellerslie subdivision. On your agenda tonight, under new business 13C, is consideration of adoption of several matters that were voted on and approved by the planning commissioner for your consideration tonight. And reading through those, they cause me a little bit of concern, because I think there's some information that you need as part of your deliberation, whether to approve or reject those items tonight. So I wanted to share that information with you. Some of it is based upon communications that I've received from city planning and the city manager, and just some of the information that I've read in the agenda. So First and foremost, as to the property itself, I think you need to be aware the ownership of the property is currently vested in Energy Fit Solutions, Inc. The property is not vested in Ron Merble or LaDonna Merble in their individual capacity. As in the first time around when this was originally, when they originally sought out to develop the PUD back in 2008. So I think that it's a record, it's recorded, and even the tax notices from the town of Kingston Springs have been coming to my clients in the name of Energy Fit Solutions, Inc. So I've kind of seen in communication going back and forth, and maybe even during deliberations in the planning commission meeting, that maybe there was some misunderstanding or misinformation in that regard. What caused me the most concern in that regard, and that's why I want to bring it up to you, is that received a communication from Town of Kingston Springs through the planning and the city manager that they were not interested in and would not be considering a PUD agreement or development agreement in the name of Energy Fit Solutions, Inc. That they would prefer that my clients individually. Now, my clients individually, they are principals of that corporation and involved in that corporation, but it is a separate legal entity. What's important to note, that caused me some real concern because that, I mean, basically, at least in my opinion, legally, that just can't happen. And there's not a way for this to move forward unless it's in the name of Energy Fit Solutions, Inc. The application that was submitted was requested to be put in the entity, was requested to be signed by the person who had authority for the entity name. The application was submitted in the name of Energy Fit Solutions, Inc. The fees were paid with a check drawn on Energy Fit Solutions, Inc. bank account. You may ask, well, why was the property transferred? Well, it basically was transferred back in 2020 because my client's lender required that it be done that way. And also it puts my client in a better position as this project moves forward under this corporate entity to better collateralize and have a better opportunity to obtain the bond and performance bond that's at issue or being required by the town. So also received an email that confirmed that once that application was submitted in the name of the entity and signed by the appropriate person, that it would be submitted to the Kingston Springs Planning Commission in the name of the entity. And unfortunately, there continued to be emails that were exchanged that was making reference to Ron and LaDonna Merle individually, and that just caused me some real concern because I want it to be clear for not only the Planning Commission but also for you as you deliberate that we're proceeding as with this proposed completion of phase one for this particular Ellerslie project as Energy Fit Solutions, Inc. So with that said, I'll jump to one of the next issues that's on here for you to consider, and that's the performance bond in the amount of $390,000. So as I understand, the city planning department came up with that number. I'm assuming that number includes some percentage of contingency, and that's common. Our engineer or the engineer for the project has calculated a number that's around $320,000, and that's with a 20% contingency built in. So we have a little bit of disparity there in the amount of performance bond. I will say to date, we have not seen the calculations or not been able to provide those to our engineer to review of how $390,000 was arrived at, despite requesting that. So really don't have a basis of where that number came from specifically. Other reason why that's important as we move forward and seek to obtain this performance bond. As I understand it, the underwriter for the insurance company who will, provide the bond, they're going to want to see those calculations because that's part of their assessment of risk. They're going to want to see. They're going to want to see at a minimum at least a draft of a developer's agreement doesn't necessarily at this point, I think, have to be executed. It'd be great if it could. But we've kind of gotten to this chicken and egg situation right now where we're not gonna, it's my understanding that the town is taking the position, they're not gonna provide a developer's agreement. In fact, they said they haven't even engaged their attorney to do so. Until the performance bond is submitted. And we can't get the performance bond submitted until we have at least a draft of the terms that the town is proposing that they want my client to comply with for development of the project and to provide this bond. I mean, it's simply assessment of risk. Just like the property you want to buy is worth 200,000, but the seller wants 400,000. Well, guess what? You go to borrow the money, the bank wants to know what the value of the property is before they decide whether they're going to give you $400,000 that the seller's asking. And that's the situation we have here. Typically, in my professional experience, what happens is usually the engineers sort of toss this back and forth. The town has their number and their calculations. They submit that to the developer's engineer. They provide their calculations, and then the engineers kind of go back and forth and say, okay, this number's a little high, your number's low. But yet we've sort of had this unilateral calculation based upon what standards I don't know, and maybe, and those may be right, but we just don't know. We don't have that information as the developer to be able to assess that. But certainly I would think that this body would not want to obtain from the developer more than is required to secure performance under the terms of the developer's agreement. So I ask you to give consideration to that as you decide on this recommendation of the $390,000. I understand that the plans submitted by my client's engineer have been reviewed, and there's some comments, and those have been sent back to our engineer, and that process is proceeding. But in terms of the performance bond amount, I think that's still a little bit up in the air. As to the timeline, we certainly don't have an issue with the 99% completion percentage that was voted on and approved and being required. Typically it's 90, but because of the history of this project, we suggested 99, and that was approved. So we don't have a problem with that. I think where we do have a problem, I think, is with the suggested 1-year completion to get this phase 1 completed. I think 2 years is too long, but I think 18 months is more realistic. A few reasons for that. Right now, if we had executed an enforceable agreement, it would probably be 4 to 6 months before we get a contract to even begin the work. I understand that supplies are also an issue. Just getting the pipe that would be required for the project, the drainage project, could be an issue. So we're about to go into, or we've already begun, as we've seen tonight, our rainy season. So there's also the possibility of weather delay. So basically, if we had an agreement as of today, we're basically only going to get 1 construction season out of a year's time. So what we'd like to ask you to consider is possibly 2, at least 18 months, which would basically encompass a couple of construction seasons, so that we can be sure that this gets done into completion.
Thank you.
And let me see, I think that's.
Phase 1 is the existing.
Right.
Yes, yes. I did want to ask for a point of clarification, and I know you're going to get comments from Ms. Armstrong, and I just, for my edification, I know that this, in the actual language that's on the agenda, it says all 99% of lots under current developer control. So it speaks in terms of lots. So I just want to make sure we're not talking about that. We're not considering that these lots are sold, houses built to completion, and use and occupancy permits being granted for the remaining lots that are in the in the project. That's unrealistic and that will not happen. So I'm hoping that reference that related to the 99% relates to the soil grading and the drainage projects that the developer would be responsible for. So hopefully there'll be some clarification on that. I just want to make sure we're apples to apples and oranges to oranges. So those are the few concerns that on behalf of the developer that I have, but certainly I think they're ones that are important to your deliberation. And I'll be here and available if you have questions when we get to that point here, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. All right, I don't believe we have anyone else for community input concerns, so we can move on to department reports.
There's no additions unless anyone has any questions. I'll be happy to answer.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
department reports,
Oh, yeah, you did have a question.
plows ordered for town ranges to assist in snow and ice coverings.
I should say Rangers, as in the red Ranger that is the side by side.
The little, okay, the little.
Yeah, in the green.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So we, after this last storm event, we thought it was a good idea and fairly economical way to proceed with snowplows on the big trucks for the big roads, snowplows on the side by side
F-250s.
or to work on the side roads.
Okay, great. Yeah, I've been preaching it.
Yeah, so yeah, that's what that is. I'm sorry if it's ranges, that's mine.
Rain, okay.
Yeah,
I can see the.
I hadn't thought of it, Glenn brought it up. I wonder where the ranges are.
Excellent, thank you.
All right. All right, legal updates.
I don't have anything for you.
All right, very good. Unfinished business, we have second reading of ordinance 22-001 establishing speed limits on certain roads within the town limits of Kingston Springs. We voted on first reading last month on this. Is there anything we need to add? Anyone? No language has changed. Do we have a motion?
Motion.
Do we have a second? Second. Is there any discussion? Or this is kind of a drastic change in town, but are we all good? All right, John, just call the roll.
Carolyn Clark, absent. Tony Gross,
Yes.
Mike Hargis,
Yes.
Lynn Ritter,
Yes.
Bob Stoll.
Yes.
All right, sorry, I flipped my page too early. New business, discussion offering use of the BOC Meeting Hall at Burns Park Activity Center and waiving usage fees for the activity center to for the county UT Agricultural Extension Office for periodic training sessions. And I believe Mr. Barron is here to speak about that as well.
Mayor, is that right? Okay. Thank y'all. First of all, we're the University of Tennessee and Tennessee State University Extension. The agriculture was actually dropped a few years ago, even though we're still doing a lot of agricultural work. We appreciate you all putting us on the agenda tonight. Thank John for helping us out with that too. We really do appreciate it. And many of y'all, I guess most of y'all may or may not know that the University of Tennessee and Tennessee State University Extension been here for probably close to 100 years in the county. Many of the families know about 4-H programs and so forth. We have adult programs. We work with families. We work with homeowners, lawn and garden programs with farmers all over the county. I work mainly with the agriculture and horticulture part of that. Miss Sierra Canals back here is one of our 4-H agents, and she works with 4-H and with horticulture. And then Tammy Franklin is a 4-H agent, works with youth development. And Miss Anita Eichler here is our family consumer scientist. We basically brought our whole professional staff here tonight from all four corners of the county. But anyway, we have one of the things that we see was with having locations to be able to do educational programming, it gets this kind of especially we don't have funds to rent a location. And with you, John, using the big meeting hall here for some of the lawn and garden type of things, we've actually had a pruning demonstration in the library one time. I guess Miss Janet over there had all kinds of stuff. And Miss Anita's been working with Miss Janet quite a bit, and I know all of us, I guess, through being involved in leadership team in the county have been at Burns Park, and I know y'all been at Burns Park for quite a few different activities. But anyway, they need something larger for our 4-H, mainly for our 4-H educational programs. And not to use all the time, not to use even, even all year long. I could let you allow me to do this, I'll let Ms. Tammy Fraser give a little more detail of what some of the activities would be. We work in so many different directions, sometimes we don't even know where one is or the other. We're all over the county. May I give her just a minute?
Absolutely.
She was the one that started the whole thing, so I appreciate that.
Well, my name is Tammy Fralick, and I do the 4-H program along with Miss Sierra. But we're constantly looking for an area that can house, at least 20 kids. We like to be able to offer things down here, but we do have limited space, not just here, guys, but all over the county. And when you have a large group of kids, sometimes that's hard, but the use of having some facilities, so bathrooms and restrooms are important. And then at times even having a kitchen to do kind of like nutrition programming and things like that. One of the things that kind of got me started thinking about it is me and Miss Sierra got certified this year to do yoga for kids. And we'd love to do some yoga down here. And I was like, the activity center would be perfect because on a good day, we could go outside, but also have inside use of facilities. But project groups, coding camps, we did a STEM camp last year, just being able to offer it down here as well to make it a little bit easier for the clientele in the community in this area would be very helpful to our programming.
How do we find out about the programs? What do you?
So we post on our social media pages, but also we're in the schools. We're in most 4th, 5th, and 6th grade classes in all over the county.
Under the 4-H program?
Yes.
Okay.
So we do a monthly program starting in October through March with them. And we're in the classroom doing a different lesson. We do public speaking. Next month, they're going to be doing demonstrations with us, but we've done STEM challenge. We've done as well as a nutrition lesson and things like that. So they find out about it through in school where they get newsletters, and then we promote hard for our camp stuff. So you see us monthly in school, but then we also like to provide them a lot of other activities and other ways to get involved throughout the summer.
How often do you have these programs? How
So-
often do you wish to use the facility?
So a lot of the programming would be like summertime programming, but also used during the middle of the year for different club type meetings, specialty group type
Once a
meetings.
month or?
During the summer, we're kind of thinking about doing yoga for kids maybe 4 times during the month of July, but we may not have anything in June. During the school year, maybe once a month.
This would be probably during the day.
Yes, or some like weeknight evenings, things like after school that the kids and parents will have time to get their kids to. So, because we understand, I have a 5-year-old and I understand that, kids, they have to choose what they are interested in and how to, what they're gonna pick because between sports and other things. So usually weeknight evenings, we try to do things based on how many kids are interested in that.
I like this idea, it's great. And I think it's a good thing, but my concern, I guess, and I was gonna ask you about this, is it does say here that they have insurance coverage through the University of Tennessee. Does that meet the requirements that we have for insurance?
We would just want to make sure that we're named as additional insured and that the amount matches what we would require anybody else match within the
So
facility.
Mr. Ron can get that information over to you guys.
Yeah.
And all of our participants that participate in our program, we also take additional insurance out on them as well. So not only they provide a medical form to us, so if something was to happen, their insurance is there, but we also have the ability to take out additional insurance to cover them as well if something was to happen. And then the University of Tennessee covers us under their policy.
Brandy, is there a certain time of day when the facility is not used as often or is?
Yeah, that's it.
Well, I guess our programming and our events would have to come first, or if we have a rental, since those people have paid. I think that would be the only thing that would affect what they're doing. So say somebody has come in, like, I know you said in July, we have 2 weeks of summer camp that it won't be available.
But in the evenings it might.
Okay.
But like if somebody has paid to come in, I would ask that would be come as precedence, just because.
And Ronnie and I discussed that briefly as well, that any kind of town business would come first and then would work with availability after that.
That would be my only concern.
With that being said, if we called and reserved that and it wasn't in use, if someone called and needed it and they wanted to pay, would that knock us out?
Mhm. I would think so.
Yes.
How many times did we rent it last year?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I know during the day, we do have our senior citizens programming in there 3
Right.
times a month. So, you know, as long as it didn't interfere with our programming, I would.
The senior programming is 3 times a month?
We have to go the first and third.
Weeknights are usually pretty free.
Weeknights are usually
are
pretty
booked.
free, just not weekends. And there's-
Right, and there probably wouldn't necessarily be a ton of weekend, we would try to do it during the weekday. Like for instance, if we were to do yoga there, it would be in the morning. It'd be a morning program, probably starting at like 9 or something like that. Or even some of the other programs that they had maybe wanted to offer, would probably be morning type stuff, so.
And something like that could be done on the grass rather than.
It could be,
Inside the
yes.
facility too, but
Right,
yeah, I think it's a great thing, like, it's fantastic.
y'all have any other questions?
Any other thoughts from the rest of the?
No, I think we could use this facility also.
And that was,
Yeah.
that's in
It's on
the
there.
proposal for, I believe some of the educational programs, especially, probably more the ones.
Probably more for the
Directed
adult
toward adults,
programs, yeah, and maybe, could
Yeah.
be some youth activities that could be done right here in small, that didn't require, spreading out children as much as what they had at the activity center. This would be an ideal location for doing a lot of the programs that Miss Anita does, and the ones that I would do, Sierra and I would do with the home horticulture. But yeah, we've got like 1,700 youth in the whole that are involved in the rates in the county. Like I said, we've got 40-some thousand people live here too, but we work with a lot of them. But anyway, we really appreciate that anyway. So I know we have to plan out some of these things, or they do months ahead of time. So if it was something that was going to get cut off at the last minute because of somebody wanting to rent it, we'd have to, I guess, kind of work around that. And we do appreciate that. Anything y'all, like I say, our whole job is education and improving the quality of life. That's what.
We're supposed to be a backup if there's a renter. I mean, this facility would be a backup if there's a renter. If it would fit in the room.
Does this facility have a kitchen and bathrooms?
Has bathrooms.
Bathrooms, but no
No
kitchen.
kitchen.
Okay.
So, I mean, this is listed as a discussion item. Is there a way that maybe the staff could work with the folks from the extension office to come up with something more concrete, maybe with a plan for this to bring back to the commission in the next couple months?
We could, as far as a plan, it would be, are you looking for some specific rental dates or usage dates for the facilities?
I just feel like that, I mean, before any decisions are made here from the board, we need to have kind of an ironed out like situation on how timing is. I mean, I'm not, personally, like, yeah, the availability for rental is great, but then also that building is public property meant to serve the community, and this is something that serves the community, and I mean, I don't necessarily have a problem with if the extension office has something planned, and this is just me speaking personally, and then somebody wants to rent it that day, I don't have a problem with telling them, well, that's already available, because it is a public facility and that's a service they're offering to the people of our community. So but that's my feelings. But so anyway, I think that we just had something worked out, so we had a better idea exactly, how these things could. Right now, we've got kind of a really great idea, but there's nothing's really nailed down,
Open-ended.
so it's kind of open-ended.
We appreciate that, but like when we use like the David McCullough room, or like the library, which is right beside our office in Passion City, which we reserve those, and we have planned some of these things sometimes months and months ahead. And some of them, maybe just a few weeks ahead, so. We have all those patron families, at the last minute, we can't use it or can't do it, that looks bad, and kind of those things, but I understand too, y'all got facilities that you rent, but yeah, if we could, if y'all look for something for us, we'd very appreciate it. That'd be great.
I mean, maybe it's just a matter of kind of just coordinating some schedules and kind of figuring out what's gonna work so that maybe we can hit the right times for everybody.
We can come up with sort of a tentative list of potential events coming up.
I don't think that we should ever put the extension office in a position where the facility is like, oh, sorry, we can't do this. I think it needs to always be.
We also market our things usually 2 to 3 months in advance, and start accepting registration. So I think
It
not
takes
having a
long.
backup plan would kind of
Yeah.
And utilizing the times as we have shared, weekdays, in evenings, for
Right.
example.
Like I said, ours are usually marketed, or they're planned well in several months. They're marketed. And we used to have a newspaper down here, we could market it. We don't have the newspaper. We depend on social media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever, we sure do appreciate y'all letting us speak here tonight.
Thank you so much.
The business of y'all, thank you.
All right, and then we've got our fabulous librarian, Ms. Walker.
Thank you. I like coming here because it's always a boost to my ego. So I'm gonna kind of, I need to read or else it'll be too hard for me. It's hard enough anyway. But it's with extreme amount of mixed feelings that I make the announcement informing you all of my retirement. Not a surprise, probably. I know it's not a surprise to Tony because he's already read this letter. But I will be retiring from my position as director of South Cheatham Public Library. It will be effective the end of July, which will also be my 15th anniversary as director at our little log cabin library. Starting a new career in your 50s is daunting. I was in my early 50s, but these have been some of the best years of my life. And I'm so thankful for my 30 years in education prior to coming to the library. I think that having that has probably served me better than maybe even having an MLIS. I feel as if I've packed a lifetime into what now seems like a short period of time. And I have been the envy, and this is no fooling, the envy of most every director in Tennessee that I've had the opportunity to know, and mostly for the wonderful patrons and staff, but also for the amazing community I work with. My relationship with our board, with Cheatham County government, with the town of Kingston Springs, and believe me, not every director has the same relationship with their town that I have with you all. And the school district and community partnerships, Anita and I practically see each other, I don't know, it was hard during the pandemic to not have you in the library. It has been of the highest and most professional levels possible. And for this, I am truly thankful. I've had so many wonderful experiences as director of the library and a few that really tried my stamina and character. And for each moment, I will carry a special memory. So some of those were 2009, our library was nominated for Best Small Library in America. In 2011, and many of you were probably part of that, we dedicated the only Civil War Trails marker in Cheatham County, and that was a neat day. In 2014, we had Jam Brat, remember that, Glenn? Yeah, Glenn's mother says, why didn't you tell me Jam Brat was gonna be in Kingston Springs? But it was an amazing day. If it hadn't rained, just like it's raining today, if it hadn't rained that day, I think we would have had more than 350 people there. But Glenn was a huge help in that. In 2017, the library celebrated its 30th anniversary with a reception at our Thanks for Giving brunch. And in 2019, we got to share the spotlight on Tennessee Crossroads. So that was a fun thing. So we're coming upon the 10th anniversary of the tornado that came right down Main Street and closed us down for 15 weeks and caused extensive damage. But I wanted to give you all the courtesy of coming and telling you myself. We've been such partners for so many years. Your financial support has been great through this whole time, and your moral support has been even greater. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for some great, thanks for the memories. I guess that's a cliche, but it's so true. So
I'll add, the library is one of the most special places in Kingston Springs, and one of the biggest parts of making that place such a special place is you, Janet. And it's something that I've kind of observed over the years. I see it all the time, even on social media now. I'll see it. And the way a lot of people, when they first move to this community, become part of this community is actually through the library. And it's because of Janet. Janet brings people into that library. And then Janet helps raise all our kids. I mean, my kid was 1 year old when she moved to this community, and the library's been part of her life. And I think everybody that's a parent in this room, the library was part of their kid's life, and Janet has been part of their life. And we're gonna, well, you're gonna be around, but yeah. it's a big
I will definitely be around, and I probably will work a couple of days a week mentoring and in the interim for at least the fiscal year coming up. But my mother is 89 and she just moved to Bellevue from California 6 months ago. And I took her to Walmart Wednesday morning and it took us 4 hours. So, well, between pothole traffic and taking an 89-year-old woman to Fairview Walmart, but it's just, I look forward to being with her, my 5 grandsons. In fact, my daughter-in-law in Fairview, she's like, oh, thank goodness, finally. But it hasn't been an easy decision to make, but I think it's the right one for right now. And, I would like to go with people saying, no, rather than saying finally. So this is kind of, I feel like, really good timing. And, our board has plenty of time to really make a good search. And I think Tony, who serves on our board, we're very lucky to have such a wonderful board. And you, Jack, and Corey from down here you all cover such a different part of what we're about that just makes it such a great whole. So, but again, I had to come and tell you in person before. Someday it'll be in the newspaper or on social media, I'm sure. And by the time you haven't left yet, by the time I actually do retire, it'll be old news. But thank you very much for everything. And it's just been an honor and a privilege. I've worked with a number of administrations in the 15 years, a number of mayors and a number of commissioners, and I've never had anything that's full support. And for that, I am extremely appreciative. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all. Thank you.
So happy to see you. Now you tell me.
I'll never get
Thank you.
No.
Be moving on into consideration of adoption of Kingston Springs Regional Planning Commission's recommendation for the LOC subdivision. Mr. Reisner came to speak about this tonight. An important thing, of course, all we can do here is we can accept or reject the recommendations of the Planning Commission. Any changes would have to go through the Planning Commission because that's ultimately who would make the recommendation to do that to us. I didn't want to. I only found out that Mr. Reisner wanted to speak like a little bit before this meeting, so that's why this is the way this happened. I think some of the stuff we maybe needed to hear about in the Planning Commission prior to this, but it is what it is. Everybody's had those comments, and you can take those into consideration along with what we hear from the city attorney and the city planner. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. Couple of observations on the information that was disclosed tonight by Mr. Reisner. This subdivision, as you're aware, this pilot subdivision began almost 15 years ago. It's been in progress since that time. Of course, there was a market depression in the middle and it picked back up and slowly moved along. Mr. Reisner has disclosed that property has been transferred, or the property has been transferred to an entity entitled Energy Fit Solutions. I'm not unaware of that entity. They own the 2 lots that are currently the subject of a stop work order because of stormwater issues that they were creating for the residents behind them. However, this is an approved subdivision filed with the Register of Deeds in Cheatham County that was approved by the Planning Commission some years ago. The rules and regulations of your subdivision regulation are pretty clear cut. Any change in ownership before development is finished has to be disclosed to the Planning Commission before the transfer takes place. any change to the PUD that you approved all those years ago had to be disclosed to the planning commission before that takes place. So hence my stance with Mr. Reisner saying we can't do that because that is something that should have been submitted to the planning commission with the transfer of property. We don't speak to the transfer of individual lots on the planning commission regulations. Obviously, you could sell a lot for somebody to build a house on in a subdivision. But the transfer of ownership for the subdivision, when there are outstanding infrastructure improvements left to be made, while there are sitting complaints from residents who are residing in phase one, is something that we cannot consider without planning commission recommendation approval. That's what your planning commission does. It looks at those things. So I'm a little disconcerted to learn that this property was transferred in 2020 without any communication to the city at all. Secondarily, there were some questions about the calculation of the bond amount. As you are all aware, there's a standard bonding calculation database that's used widely in the industry, or maybe you're not, but I assure you that the engineer that Mr. Merle employs is aware of that. Mr. Hargis, I'm sure you're aware there's a standard that's used when you pump in the information. Given supply shortages and increased cost of supplies, the calculation was redone, and the number, as I gave it to you by the penny, was $389,641.13. The planning commission then recommended that we round that up to $390,000, which is a very small sum of money. Part of that bonding amount that's provided by the applicant also helps to cover the cost if we have to recoup the money in order to complete the infrastructure improvements if they're not done by the developer. So that calculation goes in as well. While the engineer is calculating raw cost for materials, we're calculating all of it in one fell swoop. So I'll be happy to provide that information to Mr. Reiser on behalf of his client. Second, or third, I guess, the 5 lots or 6 lots that were sold to Mr. Regal were not included in the 99% calculation for completion. The timeline of completion of this project is a primary concern to me because we have an ongoing violation of stormwater disposition in the backs of people's houses that are currently residing in the building. I received a call from another resident today. I informed Mrs. Wyman that there would be a meeting tonight. She could come and if she wanted to speak, she could. So this is not a situation that is not still ongoing. And the 1-year timeline was established by the planning commission for a reason. It's to bring this project to close. With the exception of the lots that were acquired by Steve Regal, we don't know when he's going to build those out or if he's going to build those out. We have no communication with him. We were not involved in any of that transaction between the developer and Mr. Regal. But what I do know is there are 2 more lots that are owned by Energy Fit Solutions within phase 1. There are 2 currently under construction. There's a stop work order until we can resolve the issues with stormwater disposition. Once that is done, and this agreement has been put in place because the PUD expired 2 years after it was written. The city has been moving along as though it still had lassitude, but we reached a point in this development where it's no longer about granting sufficient time for a project to be completed. We are 7.5 times past the completion deadline that was originally set. So we have a plat on file with the county that came through the planning commission here that is in the name of Ron Merle. And the city, without planning commission input, had we this been brought to the planning commission could have given consideration to the transfer of this subdivision ownership to another entity. That was never brought to the planning commission. It was never mentioned in any of the visits that Mr. Merle made to the planning commission or in meetings with the city manager and myself. And I think at one point the city manager, myself, and Mark Burke. So it never came up. So when the PUD agreement was approved by the planning commission, the confines that you have in front of you and recommended forward here, that discussion didn't come up then either, even though the meeting was attended by representatives for Mr. Merle and Mr. Merle's attorney. So we're kind of in a quandary here tonight, aren't we? The planning commission has made recommendation, as North Brook acknowledged, when the mayor asked her the question, any changes to this PUD framework, which is what this is. This is not the agreement. It's simply the 4 cornerstones of the PUD agreement. Any change to this would have to go back to the planning commission for reconsideration. So from my perspective, I want the issue resolved so that we can move forward, so that the subdivision can be completed and the public infrastructure be installed, so the residents who live there have the peaceful and useful enjoyment of the lots that they bought. We also need to establish a timeline that is reasonable. And in the context of a normal subdivision, there are weather delays, as any contractor could tell you. Sometimes there are unforeseen supply shortages, but this is a period of 15, almost 15 years, 14 years in clocking, that this has been ongoing, that it's not been completed. So people have a right to have what they purchased when they bought those lots, which is finished streets. They have a right to not have water flood the backs of their property. So we're looking at, in some cases, a code enforcement issue. In other cases, we're looking at a PUD that is not been completed on time. So, Martha Brook, if they make changes to this tonight, the $390,000 calculation for the bond, I am extraordinarily confident in that calculation, given the cost of materials that have gone up since this calculation has been done by the engineers to the city some months ago. This is not a recent submission.
What I would add on, when Mr. Reiser was speaking about the 12-month timeline and extending that and so on, it's because we're going into a rainy season, as he mentioned, and stuff like that. I mean, the other side to look at when we're considering that is that's another rainy season that people that are suffering from the results of this drainage are going to have to go through the longer this goes on and on and on. So there's consequences for the people that are on the other side of this that are suffering consequences of that runoff.
And one of the other considerations I would ask you to think about as you move forward and make your decision tonight is that at some point the base areas and the base layers for the roads were installed. Those are now almost completely eroded by runoff from the undeveloped phase 2 and 3. It's the reason why we cleave them. We need to deal with this purely as a stormwater issue. Phase 1 is at this point complete with the exception of the back row. 2 of those lots are under control of this developer. The other 6 are not. He can't commit to any contract even at 90%. All that does is extend the time of build because he can't compel someone of these sold lots to build them out. But the building out of the lots is irrelevant in this discussion. What we're talking about is the installation of sufficient stormwater controls that it's not hampering the people who already live there, nor causing a public safety issue on West Kingston Springs Road, because that water is plowing trenches, overtopping the ditch, and it was in the road again tonight. So those are issues that, as with every other public safety issue, we can't ignore. The city has a duty to enforce that ordinance in order not to create harm or destruction of property to people who reside there. And with that, I'll await comment from city attorney or the commission or questions if you have them.
You know, with respect to the transfer of developer control, a transfer of lots by just a standard warranty deed or a quick claim deed does not in and of itself transfer development rights and obligations. You know, those rights attached to whomever your development agreement is with. As our planner has stated, and the development agreement has long since expired, we've just kind of trickled along every year. They've renewed a line of credit letter. And so we're kind of in this hazy land, if you will, as to, you know, what exactly are we still tied to each other with on that agreement. But to go back to my point, just because they've transferred those lots into his entity, Energy Solutions, does not mean that the rights and obligations that Mr. Marble had under that original PUD agreement also transferred with it. In fact, when I looked at the deed, I do not recall seeing any kind of transfer of development rights within those deeds. So, if their intent is for Energy Fit Solutions to now be the developer of this, there needs to be some kind of instrumentation to do that. Which brings us back to, if we're gonna have a PUD agreement with Energy Fit Solutions as the developer, that's gonna have to go back before planning commission for them to make, even though it's a small name change, and we're talking about Mr. Marvel, who being a principal in Energy Fit Solutions, there's still two different legal entities. It would have to go back to them for them to say, okay, yeah, we're fine with that, and then come back to you all. So.
If I may make one more comment, I am reluctant to recommend to this body that we amend what the planning commission has worked on over the past 2 years in order to accommodate transfer of the development to another entity where we have to start all over with a brand new plat. We have to start over with every single object, which is going to extend the time that people who are living there are going to be discomfited by what's going on. So PUDs are complicated things only when they are. Usually they not. They function and they flow and everything moves along nicely because everybody's in agreement. At the time that this PUD was drafted, everybody was in agreement. And the person who committed to that was Ron Merle. He filed it as an individual. He sought approval as an individual. He sought bonding and a letter of credit in favor of the city as an individual. He sought permits and did disposition for the project and the prep work for the infrastructure installation as an individual. Now you're being asked to overrule the planning commission, change this, and enter into an agreement with a totally different entity that has zero liability at this point for what's on the ground. So with the transfer of development rights is one question, and Mark is correct about
Right,
that.
and you need to also transfer the liability, and that's what I was getting at, rights and obligations. So, if they want to transfer rights and obligations to Energy Fit Solutions, much like if you had a developer that had a development loan on the property and went belly up, and the bank steps in and buys it at foreclosure and steps in the position of the developer, if they had the transfer of rights and obligations, will step in the developer's shoes. They can use what was done in the PUD agreement for what they need to accomplish. They also take on that responsibility.
It is a rare occasion that I will ever stand before a planning commission or a city commission and make statements as I did before the planning commission last night. Because of the history of this property and what's occurred, I have very little confidence in the forward movement of this entity in doing that. The entity that we're being asked to accommodate as the new PUD partner to the city through the planning commission and the city commission has to stop works that are issued on projects that they're under construction now. So again, the transfer of liability, they own 2 lots that are currently the subject of a stop work order, because what they were doing on those lots with those buildings was creating more stormwater and runoff. So it's your decision what you want to do, but if there are going to be changes to the framework of this PUD, we're going to be delaying this another month to send it back to the planning commission. Then it will come back to you for reconsideration. And I want to make a comment, not in a disrespectful way, but it's in order to make a compelling point about these things. The city establishes and sets bonds, period. It doesn't say the city establishes and set bonds with the consent of the developer. That's not what it says, or with the calculations provided by the developer. The city has been in the business of bonding projects for generations. It's done with a very simple formula that calculates these things. The second thing that I would like to say is that it's a rare occasion for a developer who has not performed to then appear before this body after all this time through his attorney and ask for concessions while there's an ongoing violation filed against the property. So you're in the circumstance of, do you bless that activity by negotiating these terms? And these terms were thought out very, very carefully over a period of 3.5 years in recent activity of meetings in order to move forward. So it's at the discretion of the commission. I appreciate your time. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And keep in mind, I'm the deaf person in the room.
Mike, you might want to add to this too, being the other person on this board that also sits on the planning commission, but what I would add to this all is nothing I've heard that was presented tonight is anything that was new enough that it couldn't have been presented to the planning commission, and yet it was not. And this is what the planning commission, with the information they had, this is what they came up with and put together, and this is what we have before us as a result of that. And I don't know about the rest of you, but many of us have probably heard the other side of the story, and this is something that has to be resolved. It's my thought. I don't know.
I've seen it in person. Yeah.
Well, I kind of agree with that. I mean, we've come a long way to get here. I think we need to adopt what's been recommended by the planning commission and move forward and get this thing fixed. I mean, that's the issue here. Talking about road construction and flood control. That's what we're talking about. So it's way overdue.
Is there anything else anyone would like to add, or do we have a motion?
Motion to adopt the recommendation of the Kingston Springs Regional Planning Commission for the Ellerslie subdivision in its entirety.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
If we could amend that and put in to have the development agreement drafted by the planner and council and executed by city planner. And to have the agreement drafted by planner and council and executed by city planner. I'm sorry, executed by city.
Is that what you
planner.
said,
I'll get
Bob?
the right-
So moved.
All right, that's what Bob said.
Second. As amended.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you. Item D is a discussion on the FEMA fixed cost offer related to Acorn Fork Pump Station.
If y'all remember from last month's meeting, Acorn Fork Pump Station, we readdressed the issues with our insurance carrier and reopened that claim with them. Since that meeting has passed, we had a meeting with our insurance adjuster's engineer, visited the pump station to help them ascertain the actual damages to that pump station. They've given their engineer and assessor have given their information and suggestions back to the insurance company. Once we have that information from the insurance company, then we'll pass that along to FEMA. FEMA then will adjust their offer because FEMA only pays above any kind of insurance funds that are received. However, in discussions with the insurance company today, they did not have those totals back to us just yet. So long story short, there's really no action needed because the information we had hoped to have by this meeting, we do not have.
John, what's your thought about what's the best way to proceed?
My thought is the way that I kind of break it down and to help me explain it. I'm just going to use kind of rounded numbers just to make the math a little easier. Let's say that that pump station with mitigation efforts is going to cost $500,000. Those mitigation efforts are $100,000. And FEMA pays 100% of those mitigation efforts. So that's kind of off the table. So we'll take 100,000 off the top. So we're just talking about $400,000. FEMA will pay above what the insurance company pays. So if the insurance company pays $200,000, then FEMA will pay $200,000 to get that full. However, FEMA will only pay 75% of that additional cost. So that's why we readdressed it with the insurance company, because our max that we're going to, the town is going to receive from either the insurance company or FEMA or a combination of both is going to be that $400,000 number. The difference is if the town receives more from the insurance company and less from FEMA. With the insurance company, we're talking dollar to dollar. With the insurance company, we're talking 75 cents on the
You
dollar.
mean
So
with
with FEMA, I'm sorry, yes. So with the insurance company, it's dollar to dollar. With FEMA, it's 75 cents on the dollar. So that's why readdress it with the insurance company to get their number up, the FEMA number down.
So they've only offered half of the remainder after the 100,000 that FEMA paid.
No, we're still waiting on that number. I was just kind of using that as an example.
I got you.
Yes.
So you don't know what that number is?
Not yet, but they had initially offered us
Is there
70.
any limit on the policy coverage?
There's not. The insurance company or insurance had that station, that pump station rate on their rate sheet as about $250,000. However, our policy is set up that even though it was on the rate sheet at 250, it doesn't cap it at 250. So it's more of an umbrella type policy.
Which is what I thought. So if they're obligated to pay full replacement cost, I don't know why we're arguing with or entertaining additional cost to the city. If they owe the 400, they ought to pay it.
Yes, and so that's what we're waiting from. They had their engineer to come out and look at the, their engineer, our wastewater operator, and myself were out there, and their engineer and our engineer were sort of comparing apples to apples with our engineer's estimate of we need this, 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 and this to get it back online, and their engineer going, yes, I agree, you need this, this, and this, but let's talk about X. So there's going to be a little bit of back and forth, waiting to see what that number is going to be, and then we can address it.
Anything else? Questions for John on the pump station?
The construction has just been completed at the the football. Field. That
Middle
is-
school.
The middle school has no relation to the Acorn pump, has no relation.
No, that was strictly school board. They had
Right.
some aging infrastructure that they needed to replace. They had a permit for it.
Right.
So they were good to go.
Correct, I thought so, yes, thank you.
All right, item E is first reading of ordinance 22-002, amending Kingston Springs Municipal Code Title 16, Chapter 2, excavations and street cuts.
This has to do with our process of road repair and street cuts, primarily from public utilities when they need to do some repair. Say the water company is the 99% group that does that. So in the past, the town's had a paving contractor that a process was set up that the water company, let's say this Second South Cheatham as an example, would come, they would do the street cut. We would then have a paving contractor on, as part of the town, would then come in and make that repair. Then we would pass through that charge to the water company. Over the last several years, we've not been able to acquire a paving contractor for the town because of the small amount of work that we've been able to do. Nobody wants to take on those 2-year contracts for our paving work because it is fairly small, specifically having to do with just the repair work. Because of that, we would have to, with our current structure, have like one-offs where we would have a paving company just come in and do a 4-foot wide, 20-foot long street repair, and the cost would be really, really high for them to bring in a crew and do that type of work. We would also try then to do that work ourselves, which was okay, but it's not necessarily the best solution. This changes that, and it allows the utility companies, primarily Second South Cheatham, as they are the one that uses this function, to then let us know that they need to do the repairs for us or allow them to do the repairs. Items, but using their paving contractors. That's the biggest hit. Did I explain that well? Yes.
So we need a motion to do that?
Yes, because this changes what the way that the municipal code reads.
All right, well, I make a motion that we adopt what you suggested and allow the Second South Cheatham to use their contractor.
Actually, your motion would be to approve.
To approve the
Ordinance.
Okay. Which, that's what I meant to say.
And I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, item F is first reading of ordinance 22-003, amending Kingston Springs Municipal Code, Title 12, Chapter 3, Property Maintenance Code, and Title 13, Property Maintenance Code Regulations. You could start with this.
Yeah, I'll start,
I
and
have a
then,
couple comments.
so these titles are being updated to provide consistency in our municipal code enforcement. Title 12 deals with property maintenance code primarily related to existing structures and habitation. And Title 13 deals with property maintenance primarily related to property upkeep. Town's codes official, Mr. Armstrong, and City Planner Ms. Armstrong, here to answer the questions, as well as City Attorney Martha Brooke and myself.
So,
Can you explain what's being amended?
Take that one.
sure.
The process that one goes through, if they're in violation of a code, we just tried to,
Clean it up.
yeah, Title 13 had it already pretty well delineated, but we just expanded on that a little bit more, and we tried to match Title 12 and Title 13, so they're basically simultaneous as far as the steps. Title 12, if you remember, that's our building code, gas code, all those different codes that we adopt by reference from the international standards. Those standards have enforcement provisions within them, so we kind of go through and we do what we call local modifications, take out what we don't need. And so now we're putting in something we do need, and it's intended to dovetail with the provisions that remain within those books that we didn't get rid of. But hopefully it makes for a streamlined, consistent enforcement process across both of these titles.
So my main concern with this, and this is just something that some of us who were on this board when this was adopted, is the use of the municipal hearings officer. Like, we've never used municipal hearing officer, and it's not been it just hasn't been a useful tool in any way, shape, or form of the town of Kingston Springs since adoption of having it. And I don't know that it's even worth having in here to muddy this, because I think that I just don't see where it's useful.
Sure. If I could speak to that, because I know that the planner and the city manager had some conversations, and I understand that they're in favor of taking it out as well. You know, a couple of things with the administrative hearing officer is it's a discretionary pick about who you go to. Yes, we've never used it, but the town has the option to cite someone to that. There's a list in our Title III of what can go before the administrative hearing officer. It's basically what the statute allows, which is enforcement of the property and maintenance regulations. Also, there's some zoning enforcement that is allowed under that. Where you really have, where administrative hearing officer really truly comes into being helpful is, number one, when you've got a pretty complicated enforcement issue that you're dealing with that has ins and outs, not only of, they don't have a handrail here or whatever, but also have some zoning implications and things. It's helpful in that situation. It's also very helpful in a commercial setting. Right now, if you have a commercial entity or residential and they're violating, it's a $50 a day fine maximum that we can charge. Under the AHO process, commercial violations can be up to $500 a day. And so that helps you, commercial projects tend to have a little bit more financial backing to them anyway. It's easy for them to scoff at a $50 a day penalty. This gives you a chance to kind of get your arms around that and have a little bit stiffer penalty on that. I know there is some cost to the town by maintaining an AHO because you've got your cost of training that you pay for every day. If that's become onerous, I know we spend money on lots of different things, but if that has become onerous, there is a provision in the statute that allows you by interlocal agreement to share with other municipalities and have the same AHO. So that might be something you may want to look at doing if that's a budgetary issue for you. But my legal opinion is if the cost is not something that is breaking the bank, then it is definitely nice to have that enforcement option in your bag in order to be able to handle whatever situation may come down the pipe. We do have commercial development here. We probably will have some in the future, and that would be an appropriate venue for that too.
Do you have thoughts too? We're kind of all of this.
Thank you, Mayor. While I understand the benefits that Martha Rook is describing, most of the code issues within this town are very simple and straightforward. It's a zoning issue, much as we did last month with the Ellerslie subdivision. We bring that issue to the planning commission, we establish some parameters, and we then seek to resolve that. Couple of things that I am concerned about with the administrative hearing officer, I attempted to use that process twice since I've been back in Kingston Springs in 2017. It resulted in slews of emails, expenditure of a ton of time that I don't want to pass through to a violator for a simple violation, nor do I want to pass staff time through to you for that, nor do I want to increase costs for anybody on it. I didn't find it at that particular point to be very effective. It's very complex. The legislation for the administrative hearing officer is much more dense than it is within the standard property maintenance code. And it's just not a comfortable process for most of the things that we deal with. Either zoning is handled in a zoning violation by, if you have a difficult issue to resolve, you take them to Chancery Court. Let's assume for a second we're talking about, I'll try to use an example without using someone's name. Let's assume that a commercial entity constructs on their building without a permit. We have that case in the city right now. They built an addition on the building without a permit. That is both a Title 12 building permits originate in your zoning ordinance. That has been resolved through a series of informal meetings with the owner. Some not so informal meetings with the owner saying, I'm going to send you a letter and cite you for that. But it rarely ever rises to the occasion, and in my experience and having done code enforcement in multiple jurisdictions for a number of years, never risen to the level that we want to fine somebody $500 a day for every violation. Now, in using that context, let's take this restaurant that built an addition without a permit. You've got a violation for not having a permit. You've got a violation of building code on every single section of the book that can be cited and fined at $500 because it's $500 a day per violation per day. Calculate 3 violations under that scenario. That's $1,500 a day, 30 days is $45,000. I sent the mayor an article because it was something that happened in a small town close to where I live, Darrell, Kentucky, just across Tennessee line in Robertson County. There's a gentleman there who has some stuff in his yard that he refers to as antique that he's collected over the years, it's old farming implements. And the city said, nope, that's junk, you got to move it. This battle's been going on for a year. He now has a $40,000 lien on his property. So do we want to rise to that level for these things? Or do we want to rise to the level that when someone adds an addition without a permit to their building, that we want to fine them $45,000 of the money that they're going to need in order to rectify that situation? My second concern with the administrative hearing officer, the way it's written in Tennessee code, and I actually sat on a committee at some point that heard when they first did this legislation. Your appeal, if you disagree with the administrative hearing officer, is the Tennessee Appellate Court. That is not an inexpensive thing to defend, nor is it an inexpensive thing to pursue. If you disagree with the administrative hearing officer, then you have to go to the appellate court in Tennessee and argue that case. That puts a violator in a really uncomfortable position. It may be effective for 1 out of every 5,000 cases that you look at, but are you in a position where we were told this code enforcement process and the retreat forward, that you wanted it done in a respectful, efficient, least costly way that we could do it? So it's prescribed for, we're going to municipal court. If you disagree with what the code enforcement officer, let's say it's grass, that's as simple as it. Grass can't be over 12 inches high. So you stop by and you visit with Mr. Brown and you say, Mr. Brown, your grass is 12 inches high, you need to mow your grass. We get this call all the time. So Mr. Brown doesn't mow his grass. You write him a letter, you say, Mr. Brown, you got 10 days to mow your grass. And Mike usually asks him when he's there, is your lawnmower broke? Do you need some assistance? Is there something we can do to help you with this? So Mr. Brown says, no, I just don't want to mow the grass, right? So at some point, the grass is annoying the neighbor next door, right? Because they're looking at it, they're the ones who's calling. So at some point, you send them an official notice of violation saying, if you don't mow that grass, within 20 days, we're going to cite you in front of the judge. Or we're going to mow the grass and send you the bill, because it also allows for that in your code. So you try to find what works best, but the goal of code enforcement is not to complicate the process. I can decipher the administrative hearing officer code. I can decipher it and read it. It's written in English and I can get it. I'm not saying that your constituents can't, but why would you put them through such a complex process that requires a much expanded notification process and also gives them a greater length of time before that hearing can be scheduled to offend their neighbor by not mowing their grass or having a barking dog or leaving garbage on the porch. So it's beyond the need for complication for what occurs in this town. Everything else is handled as a building code violation or a zoning violation, which we have a process that goes through. That's my personal opinion on it. I think that in the right circumstance, in the wrong hands, not the city, not the people who are currently here now, that in the future, it can be used to penalize somebody pretty significantly at $500 a day for a great number of days for something. So you like to think that political intervention or somebody's point of view or like somebody or doesn't weigh in. It's not always the case though. So my recommendation, and I provided the city manager with an MTS ordinance that is the model ordinance for the town of Winchester. It's very simply written, very simply drafted, very easy to understand. Anybody can walk in the door, pick it up, understand what it means. And the appellate process, and it's in place at last count in 167 cities, it's recommended by MTS to do so, is you take them to, it's exhausted every other form of communication you can. You take them into municipal court and they plead their case before the judge. And it's a simple, inexpensive, uncomplicated, usually resolves the issue. And 97% of your code cases, we've not cited anybody to court in the entire year. They've been resolved by other mechanisms. Sometimes you send a letter saying, hey, it's gonna cost you $50 a day if you don't do that. You never have to go that far. And then we have every once in a while one, like Mr. Merville, but citing Mr. Merville $50 a day for every instance of stormwater violation is one thing. Citing him for $500 a day, when it's obvious that finances are an issue already, what have we accomplished at that point? Besides a lien on the property, and then we're going to inherit after money up. That's my position on it. And thank you.
Yeah, if I could, Mayor,
I'm sorry.
just to, reiterate, it's discretionary. The codes enforcer can decide where to cite them into, municipal court or administrative hearing officer, depending upon the complexity of the situation and what we're dealing with. The $500 a day fine, that's discretionary about whether or not the town asks for it, and discretionary about whether or not the administrative hearing officer grants it. And I would like to, and this could be just a code change from when you were on that committee, an appeal from administrative hearing, the person who's aggrieved by that appeals to the chancery court in which the municipality is situated, and that would be, of course, here in Cheatham County. And then from there, it would go to the court of appeals. So it's not a straight court, and that's under 654 10-7.
I guess when I read this, say I was a violator and I have a violation, I pick the code up and I'm reading it, and I get to the end of the event, the property owner fails to remedy the violation. The builder, inspector, codes enforcer, or city manager may, in his or her discretion, issue a citation to municipal court or a hearing before the administrative hearing officer. I mean, then you've got the violator who's read this code also involved in this, and then are they going to let, I just muddies the water. It does actually muddy the water quite a bit when they're like, well, where's this going to go? And are they going to try to put input into where it goes, or people,
Well, I think that's where you need to be clear in the process of this, where you are going to be cited too.
Okay.
If you chose to do that, if you wanted to, amend the language, trying to get back to that.
I guess.
To, cite it in the notice of violation letter. You can. But again, having that as an option is not necessarily a bad thing, and it gets somebody's attention. They may say, hey, I could be subject to this. So residentially, and let me clarify, residentially, that's a cap at $500
Okay.
under administrative hearing officer. It's only commercial that can be $500 a day. So, you take something, you get in to cut your grass, and we didn't go the route of cutting it ourselves and putting the lien on the property. We didn't go that route. And we sent that to an administrative hearing officer, which is way too simple of a matter to go before one, to be quite honest. But if it did, then if they didn't cut their grass for more than 10 days, it's to their benefit to go to an administrative hearing officer versus going to court for 15 days into not cutting your grass, 15 times 50. So anyway, it's going to be discretionary with your codes official as to where they're going to slide them into. As an attorney, I just advocate having as many avenues as possible to enforce your ordinances.
Okay, I mean, I guess where I was going with that is if you're the violator, it's kind of confusing when you read the code if there's these two options, right? And the fact that there's no clear-cut way within the code to know how that's going to be, because it's at the discretion of our codes enforcement, our building inspector. I guess that would be my difficulty with that. I mean, I guess if it was like these cases go to the administrative hearing officer and these cases go to the, that would be one thing, but this where it's like, well, who knows? That's where it becomes a little bit more difficult for me.
Right, and that is only in that notice of violation letter that you're gonna read that, which is kind of just your initial, here's what you gotta do. That's not a citation. Here's what you need to do to fix the problem. We see a problem, here's what you need to do to fix it. If you don't, then this can happen. When they don't, then they get the citation, and that's when it's gonna say, go to municipal court or go to administrative hearing officer.
Is municipal court limited about what they could find somebody if they won't, they're in violation?
They have to find a separate violation occurs each day, and it will be $50 per violation.
That's the maximum municipal court.
That's in the state constitution.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't have, but yeah, $50 a day is the constitutional max, yes.
The constitution was written, that's a lot of money. All right.
Thank you, Crawford. One more comment. I understand what Martha Brooke is saying, and I'm not disagreeing with what she's saying. I'm saying in this case, you're building a mansion to hold a mouse. Talking about code enforcement that consists largely of rats, trash, barking animals, pigs that you're not supposed to have in your yard, livestock, those types of things. In the larger footprint issues that we have, we're not resolving. And I'll give you just an example. Mr. McPherson, all the filling that he did on that lot that had to be taken back out because it was contaminated. I worked the administrative hearing officer process for 5 months. Could never get it in place. In the meantime, he's still doing what he's doing, right? We're issuing stops every other day, making site visits, doing all of these things. The violation is continuing. It is a protracted, complicated set of requirements for that it's duplicative and unnecessary. I sought resolution by just enforcing the stormwater ordinance that you already have on the books. And it resulted in the resolution of that with a letter and a phone call. And he started moving because he understood that we could issue a stop, halt him from moving, cite him into court within a week or two, and just get it done. Whereas the other process extends the length of time because it also has the effect, as any other filing does, of staying the action that we have. So it just extends it. And I find the process, and for me, I don't consider myself the brightest crayon in the box, but I'm not slow. That was an extraordinarily complicated process for me.
But you choose the process, right? I mean, if we have both options, you get select.
It was in place at that time, then it was removed. Now it's being put back in. For someone who's trying to systematically strip down the code enforcement process to its base level in order to get the least insult to the violator in the shortest amount of time, with the most direct path to disagreeing with us, You don't need
But
this.
it is at your discretion, is it not?
Pardon?
It's your discretion to
It's a-
choose court or AOA.
Tools.
Well, she's the
Well,
planner, so
it's not
theoretically
in
be
there
at
now.
the discretion, this is
Or
at
the
the discretion of the code
Right.
enforcement officer or the building inspector,
Uh,
or in this case also the city manager.
But you guys always make the pick, correct?
well, we don't make a pick now because it's not in there. It's-
Yeah, so this would be adding it
process
in
is
to
not
make it-
in there now.
Okay.
So by putting it in there, it adds a second avenue for code enforcement when we already have this.
It is currently in there under Title 13. Title 13, Section 108 currently has that language in there. Additionally, violators may, in the discretion of the town, be subject to fines and penalties to be imposed by the administrative hearing officer. Goes further from there. Title 12 is not currently in that, but remember, we're trying to match 12 and 13 to be a consistent process throughout.
So we're going to, and I don't deal with grass, and that's him, for Title 13. I deal with zoning violations. This adds another, on building permit violations, unnecessary layer to what I'm already doing. There's nothing in this process that will benefit something like subdivision or Mr. McPherson. It doesn't benefit that process at all. I tried it. And I worked on that with the other city attorney for Mr. McPherson for almost 6 months without any forward progress in that process. It never came to fruition. So I resulted back to the simplest method there is, your stormwater ordinance. The enforcement mechanism is already in there. With a building permit, the enforcement mechanism is already in there. So to me, it's just an unnecessary layer of burden, not only on the town and on staff, but on the violator as well. So I can't think of a circumstance of not cutting your grass, not picking up the garbage out of your yard, having an unlicensed junk car in your yard, having dogs that are dangerous, having pigs in your yard, that requires that level of input just to comply with what it takes to send the notice of violation out. It's ridiculously complicated for something that doesn't require it. And that's what, it's up to you guys.
So we got kind of, so the options were replaced with this, the existing ordinance as written, or not the ordinance is presented here. Which would of course leave it at the discretion of the enforcement as to which one it goes to. But then also something we have to consider is, we know everybody right now that's regular. We don't know who's doing these jobs in 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, 1 year. And so whenever we approve anything like this, has to be, that has to be taken into account. And so the way I see it here, you're looking at it from a streamlined perspective, and you're looking at it as having a bigger toolbox to work from, and that's kind of what it is. So there's more guardrails, I guess, in place for the future by eliminating the administrative hearing process, but then we're also eliminating a tool. So that would be, I guess, the best way I could look at, I guess, break it down. It's how I'm breaking it down in my head. And there's definitely validity to both of those perspectives, I would say. But that's sort of what the decision really comes down to for this board is whether or not we think that streamlining that process and making it so that it's maybe less cumbersome for future people that are filling these positions is a good thing to do, or do we want to make sure that we have the tool of the administrative hearing officer also there as an option?
My one question in all this is who decides which way you go? If code enforcement's going to decide it, not the violator, then you can always pick the court. Is that not correct? And you ignore the AOH unless you ever wanted to use it, or somebody else after we've long
It could
left
be
here
done.
wanted to use it. You keep
It could
the
be
option,
done
but
that
you
way.
get to pick which enforcement one you want, right?
Well, one's not really a court, and the decision is appealable in both cases. One, if.
Yeah, that's not what I'm asking though. What I'm saying is, if you're violating somebody for an ordinance, okay?
Right.
You get to pick which route you go.
That's correct.
All right, well then, what difference does it make if we've got AOH in there or not? I mean, if you always pick the court, you pick the court, and we go to municipal court, and we start there, and we don't go like that, we go to appeal that court. Is that not accurate?
That is accurate to a degree, but it's not a singular decision. The way it's written now, there are 3 people who are gonna weigh in on that decision.
Okay.
So that's gonna stop that process again, while we're still getting phone calls from people saying, why is that grass not mowed? Why is that?
Well, then you don't have discretion to pick it.
Pardon?
I said, then you're saying you don't have
Well,
discretion.
there's discretion, but it's vested in 3 different entities within that code.
Building inspector, codes enforcement, and city manager are.
So who's going to make the decision and how is that decision going to be made? It's going
So
to
as
be
long
made
as
by-
y'all are in alignment, you pick the court every time, right?
But what happens when you cite somebody to court, you cite somebody to the administrative hearing officer, and then somebody says, why did you cite me to court? This time
Exactly.
the administrative hearing officer, I think would be the difficulty there.
It says, the code says that we have the discretion to do
To
it.
do it, I mean, I guess you could be like, well, it
Yeah,
says that in the
that's what I
code.
picked, 'cause that's
Somebody
what I
made,
picked.
somebody.
Yeah, I don't know. It just
I
sounds
wouldn't
like-
belabor this, it's your decision, I just tried to work the administrative hearing officer
Which is
process
what we want.
twice.
We want you to use common sense, and if you don't like the AOH, don't use it.
I
Now,
don't.
the question is, why do we need to remove it as a tool?
Well, it's not, it's in 13. In
Yeah.
Title 12, it's an unnecessary mechanism, that is building code
Mhm.
and it's zoning. So there's no need for administrative hearing officer, we already have a board of zoning appeals, we have a board of construction appeals. It's a duplicative process that just adds another layer of work for everybody if that route is taken. So if I disagree with the building inspector, I go to the board of construction appeals and say, I've got an alternate method, I want to use it. If I disagree with planning and zoning, I go to the planning commission, they make the decisions, right? So if I disagree with building code, I go to the board of zoning appeals because they have the authority to review what the building inspector says. So we already have these processes in place, why are we adding another layer and another process to something that does not need it? Just to simply, we already have 3 avenues out there for whichever process can be taken. So it's not that we're denying, and that was the concern of the commissioner who brought this up the last time, was that the applicants were being denied due process. By the time even a simple code case ever makes it to the courthouse, it's somewhere between 90 and 120 days. Because court only meets every other month, right? So they have 90 days to fix whatever the thing is. The other concern was that there was not being an appellate process. They're already in place for Title 12 everywhere. You have construction appeals, you have the Board of Zoning Appeals, you already have those. They can overrule the building inspector, they can, planning is the stop with the buck stops for zoning issues. So to me, it's just a different process, unnecessary.
So, well, there's that, and I guess the only other thing I would, is the other thing that does become a little bit convoluted is, I mean, it's not totally convoluted, but we do have building inspector, code enforcement, and city manager. I mean, I can understand the building inspector would cite something, code enforcement would, the city manager is not necessarily ever on a site. Is that like in the event where we're in a position where we just don't have one of those positions, so the city manager could hop into that position, or? I mean, because do we, I mean, and that would just be like, we don't, I mean, we don't.
That is,
I
believe that is a result of, we changed, after the last 5 to 10 years, we've changed who has the ability to appoint planners and codes officials and all that. Several different times, we've changed the names several different times. So that's probably as a result of us doing a catch-all to make sure that we have every possible iteration of who we have as an enforcement officer in here. And after I'm looking at this book, and this actually, I don't think has the changes that we made, the local adopted changes that we made on our building code adoption, because we did go in and define who our codes official was. You know, it says for all purposes contained in the International Building Code booklet, code official means this person here. I know we deleted section 111, which that went through the appellate process within that book. And we modified it, much like other towns have, and have deleted that out because we go through municipal court if you get cited in municipal court. So, anyway, so I'm sorry, I'm stutter stepping on answering your questions.
I mean,
Most recent version.
the only reason it's, I guess the only thing that kind of bugs me in the whole situation here is we've got three people, presumably three people here, building inspector, code enforcement, and city manager. And it's, well, building codes, or, so I guess it's any one of them individually could make this decision, right? Without consultation of any of the other people.
Whoever is in charge with enforcing
that
that.
violation, it's their decision.
Yeah.
The city manager is not typically involved in enforcing any of these.
Our codes official, I believe, and forgive me, it's not sitting right here in front of me, but my recollection is that we locally adopted a modification that said our codes official was our city manager or their designee or appointee. I think I'll have to, again, have that in front of me to make sure I'm spitting
Making
that
sure
out
that's,
correctly.
is that, that's a language as it is. Do either of you know, Mike?
It was
Got
a-
it in the trucks.
yeah, it was a local one. I saw it online 2 days ago, but it's
The
not.
language.
in the
Okay,
paper.
so that's why that is. So, okay, or their appointee, okay. I guess I just want to make sure that because there's three people responsible for making this decision, you know, and I wouldn't want it to be presumed that, you know, one of them was, you know, if one process is more cumbersome than the other, you know, and I got cited to one and someone else got cited to another. I mean, not that these cases ever really actually happen very often. It never really makes it to this point, as Sharon said. Normally it's all resolved ahead of time, but in that event, I wouldn't want someone wondering why it was. One case goes here, one case goes here. You know.
What it sets up in some cases, because as you know, a lot of folks who violate code like to read the code book. They come on occasion and cite it back to you in
are
word.
usually the most
It
well
happens a lot. So what it does is creates ambiguity in that code, which they then, and John has received probably thousands of calls already for somebody trying to figure out a way to get around whatever the code is. Code enforcement is a part compassion, part ugly job. Nobody who does it embraces it or loves code enforcement because it's difficult for the people that you're working with. You're visiting more hardship on them. But it also invites political interference in areas where it shouldn't be when it's written in ambiguous and with ambiguity, pardon my language. But when someone intervenes in this process, something that's so simple as you can't live in a shed turns into a bloody nightmare. It just does. And it's not even a question. So what it does is presents three opportunities for somebody to challenge that: the building inspector, the code official, and the city manager. You could go and argue that three different ways, right? Which happens all the time. A conversation that one person has with John and the conversation that person has with me, when we're all together in the same room, it's like we're speaking different languages because the conversations are so different. We have to catch up. So what I'm trying not to do is make this any more arduous than it has to be. It's a simple thing, and it's done every day. The MTS, and I wish I had brought a copy of that ordinance that's used all over the state. It's simple. It's easy to read. It's not difficult. So I would.
And I mean, like you said, I mean, I've been in many encounters with people that have been in violation or are talking about somebody in violation, and they're quoting our codes better than a preacher quoting the Bible on Sunday.
Yep.
I mean, it's really.
Yep. So the less ambiguity you can have, the less dense you can make it, the less opportunities for some attorney to reinterpret it who's representing the violator, the more successful your program is going to be in just meeting the resident, being respectful, giving them an opportunity to comply, and then moving forward when they won't. So that's my perspective on it, and I'm gonna leave it go. It's been a long day for all of you.
Well, those are the perspectives that we have to make a decision on moving forward with this. And then, of course, if there was anything else anyone has to speak about as far as this went, I mean, I'm sort of goes in, my personal opinion is based on experiences, and just having that is I would move towards personally moving the administrative hearing officer out of the process, but that's my opinion for what it's worth. Do we have any more discussion, a motion?
I agree.
Do we have a motion?
And the motion will be in agreement.
It would be a motion to approve,
12, 13, 20, and take out the administrative hearing option.
correct.
That's what the motion is. I was trying to help you make it.
Whatever, whoever would like to make it.
All right, I'll make the motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in, is there any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Okay. Item G is discussion of, Department of Agriculture Rural Business Development Grant and approval to submit the grant application and letter of intent.
I'll make this quick. There was the background information that was in your packet, but this grant's geared to help boost traffic to rural businesses. A few weeks ago, staff met with the Tennessee Department of Agriculture on the best way for the town to use this particular grant. Our initial thought was to have signage at the interstate exit ramps, but the way this grant is worded, we would need to advertise individual businesses as part of that signage, and that was really not the direction we wanted to go. So we continued our discussion with the different events and things that the town uses to help promote the town, to help draw people into the town. And we landed on how through our events, a portable outdoor stage would help us increase traffic, would help us grow our events, would help us make the events that we have even bigger and better. Currently, when we need a stage, we use a trailer for the town, and then Public Works spends a couple of days building sort of the framework around that trailer to make a stage out of it. While this works, it does sort of limit our abilities. It limits the size of the entertainment that we can have because it's limited in the size of the trailer. It also limits the time that we can have those particular events because the framework that we build is not strong enough to hold any kind of light fixtures that would go on it, so we can't do anything at night, basically. Portable stage is something that the staff, Randy and I have been talking about for the last couple of years. We see that as a big enhancement. With an amphitheater was part of the parks master plan, whereas an amphitheater is not something that we could really think about building right now. However, a portable stage would be something that would allow us to do a very similar effect and have a lot more events that were culturally based in the parks. The cost has always been prohibitive for us. A new portable stage would be somewhere in the $80,000 range. We've looked at used ones. There are worked with some of the people that we know in the entertainment industry around here that have other connections, and I believe we could reduce that cost considerably by working through them. However, this grant is for $50,000 up to $50,000. We would need to tonight, if the board is in favor of pursuing this grant, we'll of course look for better price options when we come to it. But if board's open, we'll need approval to supply a letter of intent with the grant application, which is due next Monday, not this coming Monday, the following Monday. And then we'll discuss about adding any kind of additional funding when we talk about budget at retreats and for next year's fiscal budget, the 22-23 budget, to add something to the parks line that would allow us to eventually purchase something like this.
I guess I'm confused. So how much is the grant?
The grant's up to $50,000.
How much is the city's cost to get the grant?
The city, This grant is structured a lot differently than most grants we run across. Say, most grants we run across are gonna be like 80-20 or 95-5 or 60-40, that kind of thing. This grant is not structured that way at all. This grant is up to $50,000 for something that you would like to do that would help support local businesses. There's no specific match to it. You need to define a project, come up with a budget, and submit all that information to the Department of Agriculture. So if we were awarded this, the grant of $50,000, then the best deal that we could get would be the best deal that we could get. So it's not like if we were awarded 50, we would need to then put up a specific amount ourselves. We would still need to put some more money in there because we're not going to be able to get a portable stage for $50,000, but there's not a specific amount that we would need to match for.
Well, if the cost is 80 and the grant's 50, then the difference is 30, right?
If we bought a new stage and it cost us $80,000, yes, then the difference would be 30. Then we would have to budget for the cap.
Okay, so the discussion, is there a motion? We need to, what are you doing?
What we're looking for now is, as I mentioned, part of this grant application process will be a letter of intent from the board, basically saying that, and discussed with Martha Brooke, that we would come up with some very open language where we're not locked into anything very specific. It would be something to the effect of, if we receive this grant, we would definitely pursue using it for the intended purpose, which was in our statement would be for the purchase of an outdoor stage. So we're looking for permission from the board to construct that letter of intent and apply for the grant.
Motion to approve.
This doesn't like commit us to anything.
No, we would put very general in there. In fact, I'm envisioning a comma subject to funding or availability and authorization.
Okay, so.
All right, on that basis, I'll make a motion that we approve the letter of intent.
I believe I already made that motion.
All right, I'll second that.
All right. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. All right, item H is authorization to city manager to sign attorney contract.
This relates to engaging the services of Bill Penny and Bernard Foreman that city attorney No discussed last month.
It's a stand, I think, my understanding, I was not here last month, but my understanding is there wasn't a formal authorizing the city manager to execute the retainer agreement on there, and got that in front of you. And what his hourly rate was. Jennifer was not sure she had stated the right amount, but whatever is in that letter is obviously what it's. So that would be, entertain that motion, it would be a motion to accept that engagement letter and authorize the city manager to execute on behalf of the town.
Motion to authorize the city manager to sign an attorney contract.
Second.
Second, any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes. All right. Item 14 is, or sorry, section 14 is City Hall folding tables to surplus and all right, to discard. Do we have a motion to discard folding tables?
Motion to discard folding tables.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Is there any other for discussion? Have anything else I wanted to add to this already on to our meeting? All right, reminders, our Kingston Springs City Hall will be closed Monday, February 21st, for President's Day. Soccer signups are happening through the 25th, and the Board of Commissioners retreat will be the 18th and 19th of March. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.